Hello and welcome to my talk, The Root Causes of Acne. I'm Dr. Julie Greenberg. I'm a naturopathic doctor and I'm also a registered herbalist. So whenever I start trying to kind of decode a disease and figure out, how am I going to actually get to the root causes, we have to start with a pathophysiology. And the pathophysiology of acne is actually very well understood, as it turns out. The first step in acne is there's excess sebum or oil production in the sebaceous gland. You see the hair follicle, and then you see the sebaceous glands on the side. And normal production of sebum is absolutely appropriate. We need that. But there's excess sebum or oil production that's occurring as the kickoff point in acne. Step number 2 in the pathophysiology of acne is going to be excess skin cell proliferation. So we can get an accumulation of these dead skin cells and then this excess sebum, and it kind of gums up and clogs the hair follicles. So that's step 3, that clogs hair follicle. And then step 4 in the pathophysiology would be overgrowth. So it can be bacterial overgrowth. And most commonly, we think of an organism called C. acnes or Cutibacterium acnes. It used to be called P. acnes or Propionibacterium acnes, but it was changed to C. acnes. It's the same organism. And then there's a second type of overgrowth we can have, which is fungal. So everyone thinks of acne as bacterial, but it can be fungal. And the organism is called Malassezia, and that is more commonly referred to as Malassezia folliculitis. So what are the triggers of acne? And I like to break up triggers and root causes as separate things. To me, a trigger is something that can definitely make a condition worse. But if we take the trigger away, the condition still doesn't clear. So we're not quite at the root cause. Numerous triggers for acne. Of course, excess hormones. We all know excess testosterone or DHT, dihydrotestosterone, certainly can drive excess sebum production and drive acne. Pressure. So there used to be something that high school wrestlers would get with their kind of face masks, and they would get this pressure acne. But ever since COVID, there's something new, which we call maskne. And so I think people have heard of that by now, that obviously wearing that mask and breathing into it all day, you can definitely get acne. Medications, things like birth control pills, steroids will absolutely potentially trigger acne. Birth control pills are interesting in that in some people, it actually helps acne clear up, and in other people, it will actually incite it and bring it on. Stress, for sure. I think every chronic disease, stress makes worse, including all the dermatologic diseases, and acne is no different. We know this. Certain substances or like overproduction of too many substances, things like fluoride, for example, can cause acne, but also high-dose vitamins. So vitamin B12 and biotin in high doses can drive acne as well. Cosmetics, so the things that we put on our skin, we know can clog the pores. They are comedogenic and could cause acne. And the Western diet, like meat, wheat, dairy, and sugar, the things we love to eat the most in our standard American or Western diet, definitely triggers acne. So we've looked at the pathophysiology and kind of what's happening, but where does this begin? And where do things start going wrong? And for that, we're going to turn to something called the mTOR pathway, mammalian target of rapamycin. And the mTOR pathway has 2 components. So there's mTOR complex 1 and mTOR complex 2. We happen to know a lot more about complex 1 than complex 2. But you'll see that mTOR complex 1 is responsible for lipid synthesis and metabolism. Sebum is a lipid. So remember that first kickoff point was overproduction of sebum. We've got mTOR to thank for that. And protein synthesis, skin is a protein. So those first 2 steps, overproduction of sebum, overproduction of skin cells, that is going to be due to mTOR kind of gone wild. And we have a graphic here where we can see mTOR, where it is within the cell. So here we have a picture of a cell, and this section we've got outside the cell. Then we've got the cell membrane, the biphospholipid layer. And then we're here inside the cytoplasm, and that's where we're going to find mTOR complex 1 and mTOR complex 2. We can see that there are factors outside the cell that are impacting mTOR. So we've got things like insulin or insulin-like growth factor, right? That's telling the body we've got resources, let's go build things. So that's going to push on the mTOR pathway. Growth factors, glucose. In particular, the amino acid leucine is a big trigger for mTOR production, and inflammation can trigger mTOR production. So all of these things are going to be contributing factors to acne. And then we also see something called FOXO1. And we see FOXO1 doing a little dance here. So FOXO1 can be in the nucleus, or FOXO1 can be in the cytoplasm. And where FOXO1 is in the cell is really critically important. So let's first chat about FOXO1. What is it? What does it do? If there's kind of always a yin and a yang, FOXO1 is the yang to mTOR's yin. So FOXO1 is kind of the opposite. It's going to inhibit hepatic IGF-1 secretion. It's going to inhibit lipogenesis or sebum production. It's going to suppress the androgen signaling, so testosterone and dihydrotestosterone. It's going to suppress that effect. Reduces oxidative stress and controls antimicrobial peptide synthesis, so helps fight microbes on the skin, things like C. acnes. Now, we talked about FOXO1 doing this dance between the cytoplasm and the nucleus, and it's really important, and here's why. When FOXO1 is phosphorylated, it gets kicked out into the cytoplasm of the cell, and that's almost like a penalty box for it. So it can't do anything. It can't downregulate or control mTOR at all, which is its main job. So out in the cytoplasm, penalty box. When FOXO1 is dephosphorylated, then it can move into the nucleus, and now it can do its job. It can downregulate and control mTOR and make sure that mTOR doesn't get out of control. So the problem could be mTOR out of control. The problem could also be a lack of FOXO1, and we're going to see that in a little bit. So let's talk about the prevalence of acne. I think it's very well understood globally that, okay, when we hear acne, what population is affected? People are going to think it's teenagers. And that makes a lot of sense. Within America, about 85% plus of teens are going to be affected by acne. Males tend to be affected a little bit more than females just because they have higher levels of androgens like testosterone and dihydrotestosterone. But it's pretty prevalent, and who here has never gotten a pimple? It's pretty widespread. But the interesting thing is what is happening with adults and acne. It's really been on the rise, and I even would say I have more adult patients with acne now than teens, and a lot of them it's adult onset acne. It's something that they didn't really deal with previously. And suddenly, as an adult, they're breaking out, and it's very frustrating for them. They don't understand why. And when we look at adult populations, up to 65% of menstruating females will report outbreaks of acne. It's not just women. Men and women ages 20 to 40 report persistent low-grade acne, up to 55% of people. It's very widespread. And even women in their 40s, up to 25% are still reporting acne. So absolutely no longer just a teenage thing and something that we can say, well, it's just a teen and you're going to grow out of it. That's just not true. So that begs the question. That kind of makes it seem like, well, okay, so is having acne just a part of the human condition? Is it just something that we kind of need to suffer with because it's normal and regular? But normal and natural are kind of two different things. So what's really fascinating is research that's been done on indigenous societies. So these are populations of humans that are living the way our ancestors used to live, out in forests and jungles, completely non-westernized lifestyle. One study was done on the Ashe people in Paraguay. This is a group of 115 individuals, all ages, all genders. And this population was repeatedly studied for 843 days, so well over 2.5 years. What do you think the researchers found? Nothing. Not a single, we call them papule, pustules, open comedones, closed comedones. Nothing was observed in the entire population. They have teenagers. They have menstruating females. Nobody had anything. Okay, maybe these people in Paraguay have this amazing genetics and it's unique and rare. But the populations in Okinawa prior to World War II were studied. And Okinawa is a southernmost island of the country of Japan. And at the time before World War II, it was a very remote island, and they lived a very kind of natural island, non-westernized lifestyle. And they asked the doctors who had been practicing on Okinawa between 8 and 41 years, what is happening with acne? What's the prevalence? How are you treating it? And across the board, all the physicians said, there's no acne here and we don't treat it. And then there was a study done on the Kitavan people in Papua New Guinea. This tribe has about 1,200 people. And this group was examined over 7 weeks. And what do you think they found? Well, I think you can guess by now. The answer is nothing. Yes, no papules, no pustules, no comedones, nothing. And this is 1,200 people, again, all ages, all genders. So what we have come to understand is that acne is not at all a normal condition of being human. It has become a normalized condition of Western society because it's so prevalent, but it's not a natural thing. Indigenous people don't even have a word for acne because they've never seen it and they don't know what it is. But we do find that when Indigenous people leave their Indigenous lifestyles and if they move into urban areas and cities, then they can and do develop acne. So that's very interesting, right? What is going on? Well, of course, our Western diet is very different than an indigenous diet. And we mentioned the 4 things that we love more than anything in a Western diet are meat, wheat, dairy, and sugar. And as it happens, all 4 of those things are really going to push on the mTOR pathway. And as it happens, these things are either not eaten or not eaten in abundance in indigenous cultures. So our food sources are completely different, Western versus indigenous. And we do think that this is a big driver of the mTOR pathway and why we see acne in Western society and not indigenous cultures. How is it happening? Well, with meat, and again, of course, indigenous cultures do eat meat, but not at the levels of Western society. If you have to hunt and kill an animal with a bow and arrow, it's unlikely you're going to be eating meat 3 times a day in large quantities. It's going to be a lot more of a plant-based fibrous diet. Well, meat, as we talked about initially, it is high in leucine, and this is one of those big drivers of mTOR. It's an amino acid, and it really tends to fire up the mTOR pathway. Wheat also has leucine, so it's also going to push on that mTOR pathway. Milk and dairy, I mean, if we think about what is the purpose of milk, it is to make baby mammals grow quickly. So of course, that's going to create insulin-like growth factor 1 and insulin, and those, as we discussed, going to push on mTOR. And then sugar or high glycemic load, it's high in glucose, it's going to push insulin-like growth factor and insulin. So all of these things that we eat in large amounts in our Western diet push on that mTOR pathway. So there's so many different influences on the gut microbiome. And this is also surely, we have to look to the gut microbiome to understand what is happening with acne. And we'll talk about in a bit how I really look to the gut microbiome to test and treat this. But there's so many factors that comprise our gut microbiome. So we talked about our diet. Of course, what we eat absolutely crafts what is living in our gut. But pharmaceuticals that we may be taking, where we live on the planet, the geography, where we are in our life cycle, are we a baby or a toddler, or are we elderly, how you were given birth to, how you were fed as an infant, was it formula or breast milk, and the everyday aspects of life and stressors. Do you get exercise and psychological state? All of these things we know impact the gut microbiome. All right, so let's dive in and let's talk about the gut microbiome and how it relates to acne. So just as we kind of get started a little bit, the gut microbiome is a general overview. The average adult human has 3 to 5 pounds of microbes living in their gut. It's kind of an astounding number if you think about it. It's trillions of microbes. We house and feed these organisms for free. Why do we do this? What do we get out of this deal? Well, the answer is, of course, we can't survive without them. They can't survive without us. We've co-evolved together, and they make things that we need. So we need like vitamin B12 or butyrate from them. They help crowd out pathogenic microbes. When the good guys are there, they can kind of elbow out anything that we might come into contact with that could be pathogenic so that it can't really set up shop in our gut. And overall, its job is to maintain a healthy ecosystem in our gut. And it's just trillions of different kinds of organisms. When we look at the sheer numbers, yes, that most of those are going to be bacterial, but there's a wide array of organisms living in our gut. Fungal, viral, archaea, bacteriophages, protozoa, worms. It's really astounding to think of what might be going on in your own stomach. But of course, that's completely natural, and it's how we've evolved. When we look at acne patients, it's kind of interesting because we see that acne patients are at a higher risk for GI or gastrointestinal distress. So a study was done with 13,000 adolescents, and it showed that those adolescents who had acne were more likely to experience GI symptoms like constipation, halitosis or bad breath, and gastric reflux. And abdominal bloating was 37% more likely to be associated with acne and other seborrheic diseases. So let's drill down and talk about some specific organisms in the gut because we're going to see them come up. Let's talk about H. pylori or Helicobacter pylori. So H. pylori is an endotoxin producer. It produces LPS, which stands for lipopolysaccharides, and those are endotoxins. H. pylori is a gram-negative bacteria, and we know that H. pylori can be linked to GI diseases like gastritis, peptic ulcers, and gastric cancer. But it's also linked to dermatologic problems, things like acne, rosacea, chronic urticaria, which are hives, alopecia areata, lichen planus, and other diseases. And while it is true that if you just sample any random population, upwards of 50% of people may be infected with H. pylori. And there is a debate in the kind of functional medicine community whether or not it's commensal. I find that it is not commensal, and I always treat it. And we'll get into why that is. So let's talk a little bit more about H. pylori and why it's problematic. So H. pylori has chosen to live in the stomach. That is a very strange place to choose to live in the human body because it's the most hostile place in the human body. And that is, of course, due to our stomach acid. It has a very low pH. It's very acidic. And the whole point of acidic stomach acid is to digest our food and then to kill off organisms that we swallow either via saliva. So we swallow 2,000 times a day, about 1 liter to 1.5 liters of saliva. Whenever we eat food or drink beverages, they're not sterile. There's microbes that we're ingesting. Some of them can be pathogenic, but their stomach acid is supposed to take care of that. Well, here's the problem with H. pylori. So H. pylori, we get exposed to it and it falls into the stomach, and then it drills a hole into the mucus layer of the stomach and it raises the pH. So we talked about we need this nice low pH in the stomach, but that's not comfortable for H. pylori. So H. pylori is going to start doing things to raise the pH and make it more neutral. So it induces a strong inflammatory response. It's drilling into the mucosal lining. It's embedding into the stomach wall. It's producing all of these substances. And some H. pylori produce cytotoxin-associated antigens and other virulence factors, and those are the ones that tend to lead to gastric cancers. But even if it's not one of the types that's going to cause gastric cancer, it is still causing gastric mucosal inflammation. There's neutrophils and monocytes that are coming in to fight the H. pylori that's drilled into the mucosa. And then the H. pylori is producing all of these things like urease and catalase, protease, lipase, phospholipase, all these enzymes to change the pH and to try to stay in the stomach. The problem is it can create a hypochlorhydria, so too low stomach acid, and it can reduce the acid secretion in the stomach. The problem then is what we talked about. The purpose of the stomach acid is to digest food and to kill things that we bring in like pathogens. When pylori is neutralizing the stomach acid, it's going to cause a problem with digestion while it's in the stomach, but also it's going to affect the signals going to the gallbladder and the pancreas. So we may not get enough bile to break down fats. We may not get enough elastase and pancreatic enzymes. And then, of course, that decreased stomach acid or the very high pH or the higher pH stomach acid, we're not going to be able to kill foodborne pathogens or things that we come across, and we can get overgrowth. It's one of the reasons we know H. pylori can be associated with SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So is it just me saying that there's a problem with H. pylori and acne? As it turns out, no. So there was a case-controlled study of 100 individuals. They had 25 controls and 75 acne patients. And what they found was that 56% of people in the control group, so no acne, they did have H. pylori. So half did, half didn't. But what was interesting was what they found in terms of the severity of acne and then the percentages of people who had H. pylori. So in the group of individuals who had mild acne, 60% of them had H. pylori. In the moderate acne group, the number went up to 72%. And in the severe acne group, that number went up to 88%. 88% of them had H. pylori. Now, what could be going on with that? Well, there's some interesting studies that was done. And one study is looking at acne may be due to the deficiency of FOXO1 within the nucleus of the sebocyte. So if we remember, if FOXO1 is in the nucleus of the sebocyte, then it can keep mTOR under control, and we're not going to get an overproduction of sebum. The sebocyte is the individual cell that produces sebum. Well, what does that have to do with H. pylori? I have never been able to find studies on H. pylori and sebocytes, but there are studies on H. pylori infection and what's happening in gastric cells, so the cells of the stomach. And what they find is that H. pylori infection induces nuclear inactivation of FOXO1. It's kicking FOXO1 out of the gastric cell and into the cytoplasm where it's inactivated. And so could there be something going on where H. pylori is able to affect FOXO1 in the sebocytes, kicking it out of the nucleus and into the cytoplasm? It remains to be seen, but I think that that is really a potential explanation for why we see things like as the severity of acne increases, so do the number of people with H. pylori infections. The idea that there's a gut-brain-skin axis has really been out there for a long time. Even back in the 1930s, researchers Stokes and Pillsbury hypothesized that the skin would be impacted by both the gut and emotional states. And they found that hypochlorhydria, so low stomach acid, was very common in acne patients. And they hypothesized, before we even had SIBO, that suboptimal stomach acid would allow for basically SIBO, overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine. And this could lead to increased intestinal hyperpermeability. This could lead to systemic inflammation, skin inflammation. And even back in the 1930s, these guys were advocating for the use of probiotics to help restore gut microbiome function. And there were also studies on leaky gut and acne. So there was a little bit of an older study. They used blood serum complement fixation tests. They found that acne patients were more likely to show enhanced reactivity to bacterial strains isolated from stool. So 66% of the 57 patients with acne showed a positive reaction to stool-isolated forms like E. coli, and none of the control patients without active skin disease had a positive reaction. So what does this mean? That probably it was a leaky gut causing the reaction. And then another study with 40 patients showed that there was presence of and high reactivity to those LPS lipopolysaccharides or endotoxins in the blood. And again, I think everyone knows what leaky gut is by now, but it's the endotoxins are breaking down the gut mucosal barrier and allowing infiltrate from the gut into the bloodstream of things that don't belong there, like lipopolysaccharides. None of the healthy controls had a positive reaction. Okay, so let me talk to you guys about what I find, because I felt like I was seeing a certain pattern going on in my patients, but I decided to do a kind of retrospective study, a case study, and analyze what were the numbers. Was I seeing what I thought I was seeing? So I thought I was seeing a high level of H. pylori in my patients, Candida, and Protozoa. I went ahead and I analyzed 36 just random patients from my database with a ICD-10 code of acne. And those 36 patients broke down into 28 females and 8 males. Their ages range from 13 to 40. The mean and median ages were both 25 years of age. And what I found was that, indeed, what I thought I was seeing, I was seeing. So about 94% of those patients, 34 out of 36, had high levels of Candida. 92%, or 33 of the 36, had H. pylori present or high. And about half the patients had Protozoa present. But interestingly, it was almost exclusively, I only saw Protozoa in patients with H. pylori, 95%. And I see that across the board in all my patients who show up with Protozoa. It's about these numbers. Almost all of them have H. pylori. And I think it is that hypochlorhydria we were talking about, where if the stomach acid has been decreased and neutralized by H. pylori, and you get exposed to Protozoa, it's not going to do as good a job killing it. And then once the Protozoa get out, it's game time for them, and they just set up shop in the gut. In terms of the breakdown, like how many had each number of things, so you can see that 47%, or 17 out of the 36, had all three. So 47% had Candida, H. pylori, and Protozoa. 44% had two. Generally, that was H. pylori and Candida. 2 out of the 36, or 6%, only had one. And only one person with a kind of questionable acne diagnosis had 0. And of course, the question is, well, okay, so there are these numbers, but how does this compare to healthy, normal controls? It's a little bit hard to get that, but I did my best. So with the H. pylori, again, I found 92% of my patients, my acne patients, having H. pylori. I found published research that said, in a healthy population, it was about a 36% rate. And I worked with Diagnostic Solutions Labs, and they went back and looked at at over 18,000 stool tests of theirs. Now, remember that, so Diagnostic Solutions Labs has the GI map. People are generally running the GI map because they're having gut problems. So this is even a higher percentage than probably a normal healthy control. But 65% of theirs came back H. pylori positive. And then another company, Biocanic, ran about 3,000 stool tests that they had, and they came back with the 41% H. pylori rate. So my rate of 92% was higher than anything else. Even in like the Diagnostic Solutions population of 18,000 stool tests, with people with GI issues. So that seems significant. But for the Candida prevalence, again, it's a little bit hard to tell, but I did find some published research that kind of general normal healthy controls will be about a 22% Candida rate. Diagnostic Solutions Lab, again, on the 18,000 stool test, 25%. And Biocanics, about 3,000 was 21%. So the 94% was much higher. And then for protozoa, so my protozoa rate of 53% was any protozoa. So it could be anything from Giardia to Endolimax nana, Blastocystis hominis, any protozoa was all packaged into that 53% group. I couldn't find any published research that looked at any protozoa in the gut, but the Diagnostic Solutions, 18,000 was at 12%. Biocanics was at 43%. They couldn't figure out why they were that far off of Diagnostic Solutions. Again, this was 18,000 GI maps. So 53% of acne patients compared to 12% of people with GI problems. Okay, so the goal of naturopathic and functional medicine is always that we want to get below the symptoms, right? We know the symptoms of acne, papules, pustules, open comedones, closed comedones, painful. It really impacts people's self-esteem. It can cause depression and anxiety. But that dealing with the stuff on the face and trying to suppress that, that's just dealing with symptoms. We want to get down to those root causes, figure out what's driving it, and clean them up. And so in order to do that, I test and treat the gut. I go in and figure out what's going on so that I can look at all of these aspects of the gut and try to fix them. Because as we saw, the mTOR pathway is really impacted by what's going on in the gut. And so for me, I'm using the functional medicine test. I used to use a base for my patients. So every patient who comes in my door has a GI map, stool test, the Diagnostic Solutions one, and then I do an oat organic acid test. And I use the findings of those. And really, I get these functional medicine tests done on every patient, and I use them as my roadmap because I know where we're starting. And now that I've seen what's going on in their gut, now I know what I need to do to fix things, all the pieces I need to fix, and then I can get us to our final destination, which is going to be clear skin, but not through suppressive medications, but by actually finding and treating the root cause. Okay, so let's put this all together by looking at some cases. We're going to look at 2 cases so you can kind of get a little bit of a flavor for what you might see, obviously, in different patients and what you might do about it. So for our first case, we're going to be looking at a 23-year-old male. And here we are going to call him David. Of course, David is not his real name, but we'll call him that. And we can see very clearly that this male has nodulous cystic acne and acne on his back as well. So you see these really large nodules. They're deep cystic acne. It's a pretty severe situation. David has had acne since puberty, and he's tried a myriad of things. So he's done doxycycline. So doxycycline is an antibiotic. It's in the tetracycline group. And doxycycline and minocycline are kind of they are the go-to antibiotics for trying to treat acne. He's tried tretinoin cream, so that's kind of like a vitamin A derivative, many other topicals. He is trying to avoid going on Accutane. Really, the proper term is isotretinoin. It used to be called Accutane, but officially Accutane is no longer in existence, but people still refer to it as such. Isotretinoin is pretty serious medicine. As we know, it's teratogenic, meaning if somebody is pregnant while they're taking it, it's very likely to result in birth defects. So likely, actually, that for females who are going to go on isotretinoin, they have to have a clean birth control test prior to going on every month that they're on isotretinoin and for the month following. And they have to sign an I pledge, basically a pledge that they're going to be using at least 2 forms of birth control the entire time that they are on isotretinoin, because should they get pregnant, basically the fetus would have major birth defects. So it's a pretty dangerous drug, and whether it's a teen or a 20 or somebody older, if it's that damaging to a fetus, we can understand why many patients want to avoid it and not use it themselves. So the next step is I'm going to run that GI map stool test and then an oat organic acid test. So we can see here David's results. So let's kind of go through this, and I've just plucked out the highlights from the GI map, so it's not everything. But we can see his H. pylori is very high. So when we see 2.2 E3, that way that we interpret this value is 2.2 times 10 to the 3rd power. So we move the decimal point over 3, and the value is actually 2,200. Here is the kind of commensal, more normal, friendly bacteria. We see down here the phyla. And phyla is an organ classification system. So for example, for humans, our phyla is chordata. So anything that's got a spinal cord, we're a part of it. So it's a very high level, all the way down to species and genus. Of course, we're Homo sapien. But phyla is a catch-all. So these two bacterial phyla, Bacteroidetes and Firmicutes, are showing us a snapshot of about 85% of good bacteria in the gut. And we can see very clearly that this patient is low on both of them, low on 85% of the beneficial bacteria. This is something that I call insufficiency dysbiosis. There are insufficient amounts of good bacteria, and that really is a problem because this creates an inflammatory situation. We need good bacteria, and we need them in sufficient amounts. Part of the reasons why we have this is a lack of fiber in the diet. They do like fiber, but there can be many reasons. Antibiotics, we know he did doxycycline, low fiber diets like low FODMAP, keto, carnivore, and just having dysbiosis. It can just end up with too low of the good guys and too many of the bad guys. When we look at some of his kind of more opportunistic or not so good guy bacteria, we do see some things here. I would say that bacillus come up pretty frequently. I'm not that bothered by it. The Staph aureus and streptococcus are pretty common. And E4, again, that's times 10 to the 4th power or times 10,000. This is pretty high. I would like to see that a little lower. Nothing too crazy happening here. And then we look at his digestion. And if you remember, we talked a lot about H. pylori causing hypochlorhydria or too low stomach acid. And what we're seeing is an effect of that here. So when we look at the elastase, elastase is the marker of pancreatic enzymes. And this happens. So this is a suboptimal level, the 254. We really want to see at least 500 for elastase so that we know that there's sufficient enzymes to properly digest food. And when there's hypochlorhydria and there's not enough stomach acid, we can get deficient pancreatic enzymes. Because what happens is, as you start eating, the stomach is supposed to kick up production of acid. And if it's normal, healthy levels of acid, that's going to signal the pancreas, hey, food is coming your way in anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes. Look alive, be ready. You're going to need to give us some pancreatic enzymes. And it gets that signal from the stomach acid. Well, when there is hypochlorhydria, instead of getting a nice strong signal, it's more like a whisper. And the stomach is like, and the pancreas might not even know that, did I hear it? Did I not? I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing. And we see this suboptimal level with the hypochlorhydria. So I think his very high H. pylori in this case is causing a hypochlorhydria. And then secretory IgA being high, this is a marker of inflammation in the gut. And again, there's many reasons why this can be, even just not having sufficient levels of butyrate and the things that our commensal bacteria produce for us. His oat wasn't super significant. There was, Candida was basically high for him. So he had the H. pylori and the Candida. And this is just a general marker for a bacterial overgrowth. So we see it's a little bit high. Most of the information for this patient was on the GI map. Okay, so now the question is, what do I do to help a patient when I get the results? I see the issues. How do I help? So I'm going to go through and mentally for myself now, list out all the issues that the person is having. So for this patient, we know that there's bacterial overgrowth, there's Candida overgrowth, there's H. pylori overgrowth, there's low commensal, too low bacteria. And so those are the issues I'm going to go after. I'm going to show you the pictures as we met up and as his skin changed from protocol to protocol. But it's important to keep note of the fact that all protocols are individualized, right? This is naturopathic medicine, functional medicine. Of course, we individualize protocols to the patient in front of us. And for me, I see patients on an ongoing basis every 2 to 3 months, and I move through different protocols each time. So the protocols don't stay the same. Like, for example, I switch up the antimicrobials every time. So I'm giving you some examples here, but this was not all done in one plan and not for the whole time. For bacterial overgrowth, and I guess I should have said from the beginning, I don't use any pharmaceuticals in my plans. I'm a naturopathic doctor. So this is all herbal and natural medicine. So antibacterial herbs, some of the go-tos that I love, thyme, clove, oregano, antifungal herbs, grapeseed, neem, many more than this, but the kind of classics. H. pylori, I do use a lot of mastic gum, DGL, bismuth, zinc for the low commensal bacteria. So that we really got to focus on fiber, right? So all of my adult patients, I try to target 35 grams of fiber at least per day, and we work up to that. Most patients are much lower than this, and you want to go nice and slow so they get used to it. They don't have any gas or bloating or any sort of dyspepsia, but you can get them. Things like pomegranate, whether you want pomegranate supplement powders or actually just eating pomegranates and brightly colored fruits and plants high in polyphenols, that really helps feed the good gut bacteria. And of course, probiotics, so spore-based probiotics like bacillus strains. So like I'll use Biocidin's Proflora 4R. It's one of my favorites. And I use a lot of herbal blends as well. And then with topicals, so for botanical topicals, I like oils and I like essential oils. Now, a lot of people get a little bit worried, like, oh, you're going to use oil on acne-prone skin, but you have to use the right oils. Never use, for example, coconut oil on the face. That is comedogenic. It can cause acne in people who don't even otherwise have any acne. But I also like things like niacinamide and zinc and azelaic acid. So there's many things that we can use to help reduce sebum's production while we're targeting these kind of underlying root causes. And so I'll show you what things look like. So this was David at the first visit. Then after 2 months of treatment, we can see significant improvement. And this is usually exactly what I see. And it's not that it's completely disappeared. We can still see the erythema. We still see a pustule here. There's still things happening on the skin, but it's a whole different ballgame. We can see that there's no more raised nodules and all that cystic acne is gone. Everything is flat. And so these kind of reddish scabs, this is where I always want to see it going, because this means we're getting away from that super inflammatory phase and it's actually starting to heal. And what I tell my patients is it's not like I can wave a magic wand and make acne disappear overnight, but it's like turning down the dial on it. We want to keep turning that dial until it's gone. And this picture lets me know, yes, we are well on our way. This is what I want to see. So then I would meet up with David, update the protocol with some of the things you saw on the previous page. And then we met up after 3 months and we can see again, yes, things are still improving. Now we're not really seeing any like pustules or active lesions at all. This is what we call post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation and scarring, PIH. But this is great because nothing is active. And then here, after 2 more months, so total of 7 months, the skin has really repaired itself so much. And I think if you look back at the first photo, you would never think that this individual 7 months ago was having this kind of dramatic nodulocystic acne. And then on his back, we see a similar progression. We had the very red, angry nodules and pustules going on at first. The photos aren't great and it's hard to take pictures of your back, but it's dialed down after 2 months. And then after 3 months, we also see still getting better. And then another 2 months, so at the 7-month mark, this is something actually, the white is on the mirror. It was like a cleaning leftover solution, but you can see that there's not these cystic acne or nodules or anything like was happening when we started. And so this is the power of treating the gut and getting to the root cause. No pharmaceuticals at all. Okay, we are going to look at case number 2 now. And case number 2, we are going to look at Emerson. Emerson is a 30-year-old non-binary individual. This person was assigned female at birth, but their preferred pronouns are she or they. Emerson, also not their real name, started having acne at age 11. It got worse starting 3 months ago, and it got very bad several years ago in high school, but it's never been as bad as it is now. And there's very painful nodules, and they said, I don't feel comfortable in my own skin. They started seeing dermatologists at age 12. They have tried many different topicals, so clindamycin, salicylic acid, benzoyl peroxide, tretinoin, sulfur, tazarotene, adapalene, retinols, glycolic acid, lactic acid, natural products. I mean, they said they've really tried them all, and it sounds like they have. For orals, did antibiotics. They took that doxycycline that we talked about for 3 months, and the Accutane or the isotretinoin. 1 course, but cut it short after 4 months. They felt like they were having some mental health issues. And I also did spironolactone, which is a very common prescription. 200 milligrams is a pretty high dose for 2 years. It did help with the acne, but they discontinued it due to side effects. There's many side effects associated with spironolactone. including kind of like heart palpitations and blood pressure issues. Right now, Emerson is on the tazarotene cream 3 times a week. They have also been diagnosed with PCOS, so the polycystic ovarian syndrome, and hirsutism or hair growth. The next steps, I'm actually going to do 3 tests, 3 functional medicine tests on this patient: a GI map, the OAT, and a Dutch. Okay. So, and here we just see a close-up of what does it look like. It's pretty severe acne. So now we're looking at the GI map results for Emerson, and we see that actually this patient has no H. pylori. Once I see that there's no H. pylori, then I get a little suspicious, and I am thinking I'm probably going to do that Dutch hormone test. When we look at the overall bacteria in their gut, it's pretty good, pretty healthy levels, except we do see this Akkermansia muciniphila is not found. In some of my other videos, I discuss Akkermansia muciniphila. It is a commensal bacteria that helps with that gut mucosal barrier, and it's of a keystone species. So when this isn't present, we'll talk about when we get to the plan what I do, but it is an important species. Now, when we look at the dysbiotic or not so good guy bacteria, we actually do see some overgrowth. So we see Bacillus, Enterococcus faecium, high Staph aureus, high Streptococcus, things that we definitely want to get down. And the yeast showed up on the stool test as quite high as well. So I know that there's Candida overgrowth. The OAT again wasn't particularly helpful on this patient. The GI map was really kind of the hero functional medicine lab, as well as the Dutch, I will say. So this is the Dutch test. It's a hormone test, and I really love this test because it tests for a lot of different hormones. So it tests for 3 types of estrogen: progesterone, testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, cortisol, right? So we've got the adrenal glands as well. This is just a snapshot page, but when we look at this, we get a lot of information. When you drill down into the specifics of it, you'll see the 3 different types of estrogen. Estradiol, or E2, is the main estrogen of cycling or menstruating people. So the most important for Emerson. And we can see the estrogen is perfectly normal. Progesterone, however, is on the low side. So there is still, and when we look at the ratio between estrogen and progesterone, there is an estrogen dominance, even though estrogen is normal. We see testosterone is quite literally off the charts. These 2 yellow stars and then the green band shows us what would be appropriate for a menstruating female. And this is off the charts with testosterone. We are also off the charts with DHEA production and off the charts with cortisol. And we can see here, the nice thing about the Dutch is it's a 4-point test. So the problem with taking a cortisol, a blood draw or a spit test once in the day is we don't really know what it's doing. Cortisol is a diurnal hormone. It's a rising and falling hormone. And so we need several points in the day. And Dutch is a dried urine test where you're just peeing on these strips of paper throughout the day. And it's really nice because it's a very easy way for us to measure and track the cortisol throughout the day. And we can see for this patient, it's high at every point almost, right? Well, waking up, we're still on the high end, and then it shoots up, and then it's still high in the afternoon. And then at night, finally, it goes back into normal range. But there's a lot of work to be done here on the hormone piece. So I wanted to show you that, yes, it is a lot about the gut, but there can be other pieces as well. And so the Dutch can be super useful as well. When I look at the issues that I have to deal with for Emerson, I definitely have dysbiosis, bacterial overgrowth that we saw. The no Akkermansia is a sign of a leaky gut, and we looked at leaky gut for acne. There's fungal overgrowth going on, and there's some hormones out of whack, high testosterone, high DHT. In the rest of the Dutch, there's much more detailed information. So there's some other markers that are high listed here, like DHEA sulfate, the cortisol and cortisone, 5-alpha androstenediol, and the DHEA, of course. And then the progesterone is on the low side. Okay, so what am I going to do to help this patient out? Well, again, I need to kind of get together. What are my main issues? And for bacterial overgrowth, again, antibacterial herbs, the usual suspects, berberine, neem, oregano, the ones we looked at before. For the Candida overgrowth, of course, are beautiful antifungal herbs. So some other options are like caprylic acid, Pau d'Arco, Uber ursi. For the no Akkermansia, Pendulum Probiotics makes an Akkermansia product, and they're the only ones with live Akkermansia. So when I see the results I see here, which is no Akkermansia or very low Akkermansia, I will give the Pendulum Probiotic. For the low commensal bacteria, again, you can do like pomegranate Or there's pomegranate blends of prebiotics, like Pure Encapsulations has a polyprebiotic powder that has pomegranate and cranberry and some other ones I really like. Working on 35 grams of fiber a day, working on 30 plants a week. For the high androgens, right, that's my first step, is I want to get those androgens under control. And we have a lot of beautiful herbs that work on the 5-alpha reductase pathway. So saw palmetto, pygeum, and nettle root are some of my favorites. Want to try to calm that aspect down. And for topicals, again, I use the botanical topicals to reduce the sebum production and start to heal the skin. And of course, again, protocols are individualized and plans change every 2 to 3 months. So this is not done within one plan. So now to show you what happened with this patient, so you can see we had several visits here. And what you'll notice is that dial turning, right? The turning down the dial on the acne. So at the first visit, and then 2 months later, we start to see what we saw before, which is those kind of more flat scabs happening. I'm very happy about this. I'm always happy to see this. This is forward progress. This is a reduction of inflammation. At the 4-month mark, we can see a dramatic improvement in the amount of active acne. I mean, we see something active here, but we can also see, interestingly, the skin starting to heal itself. Skin is an amazingly resilient organ. And the minute the inflammation stops, it will start to repair itself. And then here we are at 6.5 months, and we can see that there's actually no active acne going on. But we do have scarring and hyperpigmentation and some divots in the skin, again, as a result of that very prolonged inflammation that's been going on since like age 12. So what you'll notice is most of these pictures for the rest of the treatment here, there's really not a lot going on, maybe one spot or maybe nothing. But the reason why I kept working with the patient until this point is that this patient felt very psychologically traumatized by their acne and their scarring. One, they were very worried it was going to come back. And two, they really wanted to work on the scarring. And you can see by the time we get here, a lot of the skin damage that had been done that we saw earlier on has repaired itself, and it's looking really great. You can go from this to this, and you can do it 100% naturally when you're getting at those root causes. This is just the other cheek. Again, we can see that actually in some ways it may look a little worse here, but again, it's flatter and less inflamed. And then by that 4-month mark, the 3rd visit, we could see a significant reduction. And then we can start to see the damage that happened to the skin, the scarring, the pock marks, the hyperpigmentation, stuff like that, and just a vast improvement by the time we're done with treatment. So this is just a first visit, last visit, and to show you, and she was really thrilled with the progress and where we left off. So what are some things to consider if you want to try to treat this way? Well, I would say if you're treating a patient with skin disorders, think of the gut. Go ahead, order functional medicine lab tests, test that gut, see what's going on. Then you're going to analyze all the problems that you'll need to address on all the tests that you do. Decide what order you want to treat them in. Don't try to treat everything all at once. That's a mistake. You've got to kind of batch it down, figure out what's most important, and do things as they kind of come. See how the patient is responding, and then change your plans. You're going to have to learn the best protocols, of course, to treat all the issues, both internal and topical, and adjust obviously basing on your patient in front of you. Are they an infant, a toddler? Is this a breastfeeding mom? Do they have allergies? I like to move through different protocols about every 2 to 3 months, and I treat beyond skin clearance. And what that means is that you could see that just because the skin cleared up doesn't mean we immediately stop treatment. We have to make sure to treat all those issues, all those root causes, clear them up, and then the patient can go on their own, and that's the best chance at not having it return. Does it work for other dermatologic conditions? This is just a thing for acne? Nope, this is the method that I use on all of my patients. So whether I'm treating eczema, psoriasis, rosacea, keratosis pilaris, seborrheic dermatitis, obviously acne, all the things, hair loss, alopecia areata, this is my foundation for treating the root cause of all of these diseases. And if you liked what you saw here and you're really passionate about derm, you can check out my root cause functional dermatology professional courses. It's comprehensive functional medicine training courses teaching you how to order and use these labs to treat these derm conditions and get to the root cause. So you get taught how to analyze the GI map, the Dutch tests, oats, mycotoxins, all about treating the gut and many different conditions. And there's two options. There's a live 4-month mentorship cohort course. They are at different times of the year. So you can check out rootcausedermatology.com/courses for medical professionals and see when the next ones are running. This is for licensed healthcare professionals, but the self-paced course is for maybe non-licensed healthcare professionals who can still order labs, something like a functional nutrition type situation. So there's two options to choose from, and you can download the PDF and get more information. You can also see reviews from other students who have taken and completed the course and see what they thought about it. Of course, if you are interested in doing this, you can order these functional medicine tests through Rupa Labs. They make it easy. You're going to put in the patient information once, and then you can just tick off all the labs that you want, send them off to the patient, and they will help the patient get them done and give them instructions and all that and help troubleshoot. So Rupa Labs is going to make it easy for you to help get this done for patients. So I hope you've enjoyed this talk on acne and the root causes of acne, and I hope you'll join me in my future talks. Thank you.
Welcome to Rupa Health, the best place to order, manage, and track results from over 30 different lab companies in one single place for free. It's going to take you under 2 minutes to sign up, and you can order any functional medicine lab for your client in under 30 seconds. Let me show you how it's done. So here's our beautiful interface. I'm typing in the name of my client, selecting the lab that I want to order for them, and hitting send. From there, Rupa and their amazing team handle the rest. They email the client, collect payment, and even offer an interest-free 3-month payment plan. We've also built the world's largest library of information about chronic health conditions, the lab tests that can help you find the root cause, and the evidence-based interventions that you can use to help people heal from them. It's called the Rupa Health Magazine. There, we have in-depth articles about almost any health condition you can imagine. And we give you step-by-step protocols that other clinicians have used to help their clients heal and that are verified by evidence-based sources. You should totally check it out, and it'll transform your practice. And we can't wait to see you. So make sure you sign up today at rupahealth.com.